Hey Jen, what's up?
Hey, I love the intro music. Sometimes I wish I have that like playing sometimes when I walk in our room just to like get excited.
You know what you should do? You should make it your alarm in the morning when you wake up. So every morning it's like you're starting a podcast, the
Oh my
podcast,
God.
but
That
it's
is a
your life.
great idea. I love it.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, we're here. We had some technical difficulties over here today.
We are,
Um,
yes. Hopefully we won't freeze anywhere. We had a little
d-
little freezing problem, but
yes,
although tis the season, right? It's freezing out, all of it, winter, we're
yeah,
freezing.
continuing to snow every day
The kids are
perpetually.
finally back to school after being off all week last week.
There's no more bills to look forward to. Yeah, so we're not going to really talk about any of that. We're just going to leave
Too
that
soon.
there.
Although I'm still sporting it. I mean, go
Yeah,
Bills, but it hurt.
yeah.
I was
It,
there. I was there, and walking out of the stadium was eerily quiet. It was
yeah,
just
I
people
heard
just
I heard that it was pretty interesting. So, yeah, so we'll leave that there. So,
next year. There's always next year, right?
of course.
The Super Bowl victory is going to feel and taste that much sweeter. I know
Oh
it.
yeah, totally, totally. God bless. All right. Well, let's talk about this year. I guess the new season of the Bills starts this year too. But let's talk about another update for 2024 today, Jen. And it's kind of a doozy. So kind of buckle in, and you may, if you are an employer or a business who has independent contractors, my advice to you is to listen to this and take notes and probably rewind and listen to certain parts again, because this is a super robust topic and it's extremely significant and an extremely significant topic right now. So, and the repercussions for doing this thing specifically, this particular thing wrong, are pretty insane and significant. So you're going to want to make sure that if you had independent contractors of any type, that you listen to this. So Jen, I'm sure because you're, so into HR stuff like me.
I love it. I wake up thinking about it, just like the music.
Yeah. So, what we're going to talk about today is basically the rollback or the final decision on a rule that the Trump administration had put in place in 2021, which kind of changed the game for the first time in a long time around what is considered or allowable to be an independent contractor versus an employee. So, up until 2021, or like January 2021, there was a rule that was in place that was, had been in place for quite a while, a 6-factor rule, pretty ambiguous test, lots of factors, right? That said, for someone to be safely classified and properly classified as an independent contractor versus an employee, these are all the factors that, we as the DOL are going to consider. And today we're talking about the DOL's test, by the way. So there's rules and tests that the IRS has, there's rules that states have, but we're talking about the federal DOL today. So in 2021, the Trump administration, right before going out of office, they passed this change that basically changed that to a 5-factor test from a 6-factor test, and also really said, hey, we're going to actually focus really on 2 of these factors of these 5. So in that way, it made the checklist or the test for someone to be safely an independent contractor much more black and white, because you were really just focusing on 2 main factors. You didn't have to focus on all of these 6 factors and make sense of it all. So that was kind of good news for employers. Since then, it's been kind of like highly debated of if the rule was going to change back under the Biden administration or when that would happen. And now, as of this year, and the official drop dead date is March 11th, but for all intents and purposes, it's kind of in effect now. As of a couple weeks ago, the rule did change back. So today we're going to go through what that means. This has been a very confusing, I'm sure everything I just said to everyone was very confusing. It's been a very confusing 3 years to understand what is the rule, when can I have independent contractors, when do they have to become employees, what are the criteria, and hopefully today we can kind of set that straight for you guys, and put you on the straight and narrow of making sure that you have all your ducks in order when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest highlight is it's a test that you go through, and it's not a choice. And I think that's the biggest misconception. Again,
Yeah.
I don't think business owners are doing it on purpose. They just are thinking about how they want to pay as opposed to going through the test appropriately. And that's the biggest highlight of this is you got to go through the test no matter how you want to do it.
Yeah.
And if you do it a certain way, then you have to follow certain rules to be able to do that and not be fined and not
Yeah.
get
Yeah,
hurt.
and I know we've talked about this on other episodes, Jen, when we talk about like whether you pay your employees salaried or hourly and whether you track their hours to pay them overtime. Like all these employment related rules, like you said, Jen, it does not matter what you prefer. And it also, just crazily as it sounds, it doesn't even matter what the employee prefers.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you have an independent contractor in this situation that says, I want to be an independent contractor, I like being autonomous, I want to be paid this way, I don't mind taking care of my own taxes, blah, blah, blah. It does not matter. Your own preference, their preference does not matter. You really have to think about this from the eyes of what would the DOL want and what would the DOL decide, and that's going to be the determining factor. So really, yes, important point, Jen, to make off of the bat that don't think that you don't need to listen to this because everyone's happy that's a contractor
Yeah,
for you. You do.
exactly. I think that's, the point of listen to this. Like you said, even if the employee loves it, how you have it set up and you love it, you have to go through this test, and we're going to talk about how it's changing. And it's tight and it's a very narrow window of when you can have a contractor is the summary of all this. So
Yeah.
in most cases it is going to be an employee, but let's talk about how it's changed and what we have to go through.
Yeah. So, and I want to make the point too, you could be listening to this as a business that has a huge group of contractors. So, common groups of employees that are kind of like outsourced as contractors versus employees are maybe delivery drivers of some sort for you, or actually some big cases in New York in the past few years have been golf caddies. So, like, um, uh, country clubs will kind of like outsource that group of employees, right, as independent contractors. So it could be groups of employees, janitors perhaps as well, right? If you're not in the business of cleaning, but you need a group of people to clean, like potentially, that whole group could be under scrutiny of this as well. Or it could be onesie twosies. So if you're a little business listening to this, or you're a startup, and this is very common with startups, and you have contractors versus employees because it's easier, that's what they prefer, whatever it might be, even if it's one person, it's still worth listening to this because the penalties, even for one person, can be extremely severe. And frankly, money and fines that could just end your business before you even get started. So let's get into this. So why does this matter? What is going on here? Why does it really matter if someone's an employee or independent contractor? So the rule we're going to talk about today, again, is the federal DOL standard. So there are, again, IRS standards for determining this because they care about this from a taxation standpoint. Specific states have more strict tests than even this new federal standard. New York is not one of those states, by the way. But this matters to the DOL, this matters to the IRS. This matters because when someone is a contractor versus an employee, they are subject to many less rights that compared to employees, and the ability to tax you and collect fees from you as an employer or as a business becomes much harder when you have contractors versus the steady stream of taxes and things through payroll and employment. So these agencies have a vested interest in the outcomes of these classification tests, right? So think about it. If someone is an employee, Jen, as you know through all these episodes we've recorded, versus an independent contractor, they are subject to all the employment laws and rules. So things like ACA and your requirement to provide them benefits if you're of a certain size. The exemption, right? Whether they're paid salaried, hourly, whether they're paid overtime, minimum wage, right? Hourly or salaried minimum wage. None of that stuff applies to contractors, but it does apply to employees. So the DOL also has a greater ability to regulate and control the business's treatment of staff and workers if people are employees as well. And of course, they want that power and control. So they prefer and they have a vested interest, we can at least say, in these classifications. And then, like I said, if people are employees, there's also financial ties that these agencies have to them. There's other obligations like providing disability insurance, workers' comp, FICA taxes, Social Security tax, right? You're not paying into that as an employer if they're not an employee. That's why this matters. There's a huge difference between the rules and conditions and finances when it comes to an employee versus a contractor classification.
And
So
just like
that's
you
why,
said, it's not just individualized. Obviously you have the FICA and the disability and the workers' comp, but when you're lumping it into how many employees you have, that's when ACA comes into effect, and that's when the retirement mandate comes into effect, and that's when these paid sick time for New York State. If you have more than 5 employees, so once you start grouping them together as
right.
well, these other things come into play. So it's really
Yeah.
important to know what each individual is classified as.
Yeah, for sure. And again, there's just so much skin in the game for everyone involved that that's kind of why this is such a highly contested and kind of like examined area of employment law. So,
Yeah.
so obviously, Jen, based on everything we said, I'm going to use like an old timey term here.
Oh
It
boy.
be- it behooves the employer to the business to have independent contractors versus employees because listen, all those things we talked about typically rack up to if you have an employee that you convert from independent contractor status or that you hire, you can guarantee in a state like New York, especially, whatever salary you pay them, add 20 to 30% on top of that. And that's what the actual cost of that person's going to be, because that's what you're going to be paying in employment taxes. And again, disability premiums, PFL premiums, workers' comp. So, of course, if you can avoid all of those costs and all of the administrative burden of having an employee and doing all the things that are required to comply with that, as an employer, especially, again, a startup or something, you're going to want to do that. So, with that being said, it behooves the DOL and the IRS and other agencies, like we've said, to have these people be employees because it's way easier to control and give them rights and collect money from you, on account of that. So, this is really why all this is so important and why it's contested, and it's not just a matter of preference and why can't we all just do what we want to do. Although I agree with that, this is kind of why people want to control this test.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. The Department
um,
of Labor and the IRS don't see it the same way. So
yeah,
uh, that's why we got to talk about these rules.
yeah. So, all right. So let's talk about kind of like the new or the old new test. So that 2021 rule that changed. We won't go too deep into it now that it's not the
Yeah.
main test. But it was a 5-factor test, and it did base kind of these decisions on 2 core factors of the 5, which had to do with the nature and the degree of control that the business had over the work that the person was doing or the people were doing, and the worker's opportunity for profit or loss. So, if in general, in the past 3 years, you had contractors that you didn't really have much control over, and they controlled their ability for profit or loss, right? They were setting like kind of blanket fees and things, and they were responsible for managing the cost to manage how much they profit. Like that seemed like you were in pretty good standing. Um, and that was again seen as a win for employers because the test became a little bit less ambiguous, and arguably the bar was kind of like higher to overcome to have an independent contractor versus an employee. But like I said, we are now back to dropped back into the old reality, which is the 6-factor test, Jen. So let's talk about what the factors are and the things that you guys should really and need to consider when you go through, which you need to do as a result of this change. Go through and examine your relationship with all of your independent contractors and determine whether or not you are in, a safe, I would say safe is the best word, a safe situation to continue to move forward with them as independent contractors, or if you need to consider converting them to employees.
And again, as always, our point is to, if your answer to a question, it may be on the fence of something, you're going to want to err on the side of caution. So if it's
Yeah.
not a clear answer for you, which it should be, but if it's not, err on the side of caution. Always, always, always. But
Yeah.
let's talk about the 6 factors, and you literally write these down, go through the test, write yes or no, and then and they have this test right on the Department of New York State site, correct?
So again, this is federal DOL. So yeah, you could probably,
IRS.
unfortunately, because it's been so like back and forth, I think Googling this at this point is going to result in finding a lot of different things that say a lot
Yeah,
of different things. So we will put this up on the Ally HR Partners website too. We'll recreate the checklist for you
perfect.
guys and put it up there to work through. But we'll kind of go through it step by step now and explain it and add a little bit more nuance to what we're going to put in writing.
Awesome.
So, this new test goes back to a standard that is really based on the totality of circumstances, Jen. So, all these legal terms, right? So, basically, what that means is, even though the DOL is providing these six factors to consider, they're making it very clear that, while even though we're saying these six factors matter, they're very clear to say no one factor matters over the other more or less. And, even if you pass with flying colors on one of these factors, that doesn't mean that we're not going to consider the other one, but maybe it does mean that. And it's just very ambiguous, which is intentional, right? Because that leaves them kind of this discretion as these cases come up to kind of determine based on what they want to at the time, what the outcome should be. So again, when you're going through this, don't have any misgivings that because you pass really well in one area or the relationship is strong on the IC side in one area, that the other area being weak is not going to matter. They, at their discretion, can kind of look and decide which matters most. And again, this totality of circumstances. They also say, Jen, right, in these new regulations that they can consider other factors as well that aren't even mentioned on this list of factors. So again, it's all pointing to the fact that they want to err on the side of everyone being employees, and you should assume that that's what they're going to do if this is ever challenged. Um, but the primary question, Jen, of this new test is, are workers economically dependent on the employer for work, or are they in business for themselves? So as you're going to go through these factors, you're going to see that that is kind of like the heart of what's being driven at here. Um, so the first question is, what is the worker's opportunity for profit or loss depending on managerial skill? And that really means, can they control their profit or loss through their own management, initiative, or business acumen or judgment? So now, this does not mean that the independent contractors that you hire have to actually be profitable. They could be losing money, and that's fine. Not your problem, right? They're an
Yeah.
independent contractor. However, Jen, it does mean that they have to have the ability to do this. So and my takeaway with this is, you should never ever, and you're going to see this in a lot of these factors, you should never have an independent contractor generally that you're paying on an hourly basis. That means like they don't have a lot, like I guess um, they could build in their margins into their hourly rate, but generally that's taking away a lot of the ability to earn profit or loss when you're tying directly what you pay them to the time that they spend actually doing work for you. So that's kind of a good example of where the kind of standard comes, where the thesis comes for this part of the standard.
Are you
And
saying that's more of like a look at it as a totality of a job, as opposed to, it doesn't matter how long you're there. This is the job that's being done.
Yeah, so the more, and again, the more factors you're kind of controlling about, like the time they have to spend, which you'll see in the other factors that we're going to list, but the time they have to spend working for you, the tools that they have to use, where they do it, that kind of stuff. The more you're controlling that stuff, the more you're probably controlling their opportunity to profit or loss.
Yeah.
And the less control they have over that, which means the more likely it is that they should be an employee and not an independent contractor.
Right.
So the second factor talks about, what is the relative amount of investment made by the worker and compared to investments made by the, business or potential employer. And this is really similar, Jen, right? So, are they having to invest like capital funds into their business, or, buy large pieces of equipment or something to do this? Or not, right? Or do they just have to maybe buy a couple things of software, or a pair of steel-toed boots or something like that. If there isn't a ton of investment being made on the part of the individual contractor and the employer is kind of taking care of those big infrastructure things, or the businesses, it's more likely the person should be an employee and not an independent contractor.
And that word relative is always, right, the gray area that we always talk about, of the gray area, but err on the side of caution. So
yeah, and these words and those words, Jen, like relative and, generally, are built in so that they have like subjectivity and discretion when they're going through.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think you took the words right out of my mouth, is the subject to discretion. So
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
just, if you were, you got to put yourself in their shoes. If they're looking at something that they feel like you did wrong, how does that, what does that look like? And again, we say this often, this could be unintentional, but this is what you want to follow. And we're not saying it's intentional, and you're trying to not, pay those extra insurance and benefits and everything that comes along with an employee. It just may be a genuine misunderstanding. But these are what you need to follow, because they're not gonna give you the pass saying, well, it wasn't a misunderstanding of the law.
Yeah, like all the things we talk about and mention all the time, Jen. Like, yes, you are 100. Like, the burden of proof is always on the business or the employer, so they're going to assume they will assume you're guilty in all these employment related areas until you prove yourself innocent. And in this case, that guilty means they will assume that you have improperly classified your independent contractors unless you can prove and show the burden of proof that they actually meet all of these standards to be safely an independent contractor and therefore are not an employee. So yeah. And of course, Jen, like other employment laws, there are more severe penalties if you're found to be willfully non-compliant, including prison time, jail time, which we'll talk about at the end. I was saving the horror of the penalties for the end of the podcast.
But it's serious.
But otherwise, no, it doesn't matter whether you were just naive or ignorant or well-intended or not. The financial
just like any law,
penalties are going to be there.
You have to know the laws.
Yes. Yeah. All right. So those are factors 1 and 2. So getting back into the list. So number 3, what is the permanency of the worker's relationship with your business? So in this situation, obviously, if you think about employees, right, those employment relationships are generally pretty indefinite relationships. It's employment at will, so you can hire and fire at any time. However, you hire someone and generally it's this is going to go on forever until the business ends, or you don't do well, or you decide to leave. So if your relationship with your independent contractors is similar to that, where you aren't specifically hiring them to do a specific project or, execute a specific deliverable that has some sort of horizon date to it, that does not look good in your argument that the person is an independent contractor and not an employee. So we'll talk about ways to kind of define that go in your favor when we get into what you should do as a result of this. But just make sure that you understand that is a big factor as well. The 4th factor is the nature and degree of the potential employer's control over the person. So that would be you as the business. What is the nature and degree of control that you have over what the independent contractor is doing? If you have an independent contractor and you are controlling, again, when they do the work, how they do the work, that they have to show up to certain meetings, the tools that they have to use,
when they take breaks, when they're, in and out.
Yeah. Working hours, working schedule. If they could use, this is a wild kind of example, but say they need to use a CRM or something. If you tell them which CRM system to use and they aren't using their own, then that's a bad sign, right? So software tools, we're talking about using your email versus their email. That might be considered. I'm not saying that's a disqualifier, but the more things like that, the more details you're controlling about their day-to-day interaction with the customers or the work, the worse your argument is going to be for them being an independent contractor.
I didn't even think about the email. That's a good point.
Yes. Yeah,
Because
that's a big point.
yeah,
If they're walking and talking and looking and tasting whatever, like your employees, I don't know what your employees taste like.
right.
Okay.
Like, well,
Uh,
hopefully you don't know that, but yeah, if it walks and talk, what is it? It's saying like walks and talks like a duck or sounds like a duck, probably a
yeah,
duck.
if it quacks, yeah, it quacks like a
Walks
duck.
and quacks like a duck.
But if you look at your independent contractors, and whether it's because they have your email and your email signature and they're portraying themselves as your employee, and if that's occurring in any situation, a single person or group of people, that's a really bad sign.
Yeah.
You're probably going to lose this argument. um, that gets into the final couple of factors of the test here. So the fifth is the extent to which the work performed is an integral part of the potential employer's business. So, how much is what the independent contractor or contractors doing? Is it specialized work that is not really consistent with or totally related directly to what you do as a business? So, like, um, is it a guy that's coming in and like painting the walls, but otherwise, like, you guys make pizza? Like, those things aren't related, so that's probably specialized.
Mhm.
But if you're a painting company and you outsource the painting work to independent contractors, like that, you are a painting company and painters are employed by a painting company. So certainly you don't want to be mixing like what employees do with what independent contractors do, because they're going to be regarded as employees almost always in those situations. So the specialization thing and how directly what they do is related to your business is important to consider. Um, and that's really brings us into the sixth factor, which is all about that specialization. So, do they have specialized skills? This is where kind of like the expert thing comes in, Jen. So, like, when I work with clients, I'm an HR expert. Usually, they're not in the business of doing just HR.
Mhm.
So, my skill is specialized.
Yeah.
I'm injecting that into the business. Same with a lot of like marketing relationships or maybe sales consultants. But if it's something that is not specialized and someone's doing, for example, having a executive assistant or something as an independent contractor, definitely
Mhm.
not specialized work. They're doing pretty admin work. That's probably pretty task based, and you're directing them. That would not be a fight that you're probably ever going to win for them to be a contractor. So
Oh yeah, yeah, especially that admin, anything that you're directing them
yeah,
for, and it's hard because you think of contractors. I think stereotypical contractors. Like, what does that mean? Like, I'm hiring you're hiring an extra person to lay floors or something, right? Like, it's not a company, but
hmm
you need an extra professional there, or somebody renting a chair in a salon. They're not
yeah,
they're not controlled their hours or anything, but they're paying to rent a chair and that's it.
yeah,
But it gets a little fuzzy when uh, you're also kind of representing them as a business,
yeah,
and then an employer casually starts to mention some things that they want done because this is their business, but at the same
yeah,
time this is somebody who's totally separate. So it gets a
yeah.
little fuzzy there, and that's where we got to watch it.
Messy.
Yeah.
Yeah, messy. And I think that's just one red flag for you as a business owner. If you can like think in your business now about any independent contractors, again, groups of workers, individual people, if you think, yeah, that's a little messy, it's a little gray, they've started to kind of creep, that's a red flag. And probably either you want to really severely walk that back in the next month, and redefine terms and expectations, or
Mhm.
you really should think about making them an employee.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I think people, and this is a good point too, Jen. Freelancing, people might think, oh, well, they're just a freelancer. That's different than an independent contractor. A freelancer is an independent contractor.
Mhm.
So, just because someone's saying they're a freelancer, they want to remain free and autonomous and whatever. A lot of freelancers out there will just do like basic admin work or basic like marketing, like social media posts and things. And if it's too procedural, if it's too administrative, if it's really
Mhm.
not providing like kind of like expert level marketing or I guess maybe like expert level admin work of some sort, then probably really should not be a freelance relationship, and it should not be an independent contractor relationship, and it should be an employee. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I
So
think even
those,
people get confused of that term, freelancer, sound, because that's what it sounds like. But it's going through this test again.
yeah,
Figure out how free you really are from being
right.
employed.
Well, because freelancers are required to do their own taxes at the end of the
Mhm.
year and file a 1099 and pay like their share of their employment taxes plus the employer's share, which is exactly a contractor. So there's
Yep.
no difference there.
Yep.
Um, so those are the 6 factors. I would say when you're listening to this, you might want to pull them up on the computer or on your phone or whatever it might be from our website, and then kind of listen as we go through and translate them a bit more. But again, remember, those are the 6 kind of general factors that the DOL is planning to use. Remember, though, they're looking at the totality of circumstances, and they specifically say no one area of strong indication that someone is not an employee makes up for weakness in another area. Weight is given, different weights can be given to different factors based on the quote, specific facts and circumstances of a particular relationship. So they're setting the stage from the get go, and this is how it's always been. But that this is going to be really subjective. So when they're enforcing, which they're
Oh
going to
yeah.
be enforcing at a much higher rate, it's highly anticipated um, moving forward. So that's really the takeaway, Jen. So when we talk about like the unfiltered explanation of these things on these podcasts, that is the unfiltered and perhaps some would say cynical takeaway, which is this is ambiguous. It's meant to be ambiguous. If you read anything, any like legal analysis on this, it will clearly state, and it's pretty unified in this opinion, that the DOL wants there to be more instances of misclassifications. They're intending to go out and really scrutinize independent contractor relationships at a very high, big picture level in the coming at least year as a result of this. And so you should be prepared that that's kind of like the perspective and the stance that's being taken, and be prepared to have to really defend your statuses. So, other kind of like we talked about red flags, Jen. I feel like that's a common term on unfiltered HR too. Red
I
flags.
know.
We should, but this is good that we have like recurring terms that we use and
Yeah.
jokes, and maybe people might make it a drinking game someday to listen to unfiltered HR,
I
and
don't know
then they
why we
can.
don't make it a drinking game.
Oh God, well,
uh,
someone's got to have fun with HR. So
I know, right? I mean, I gotta make it fun. But no, the red flags. I like how we do the podcast where we inform in the beginning, and then towards the end, we're talking about the red flags. So you're having the bullet points of what these red flags are, and it's again, it could be
tangible.
unintentional, but if these any of these sound familiar to you, make sure that you're taking that test. And even if you have one contractor, you should really be looking at this more deeply. And as you said, they're going to be taking a fine tooth and comb and looking for the misclassification. And
Yeah.
so make sure you're on the right side of it.
So let's talk about some like tangible real world red flags besides just kind of like the factors that the DOL is defining. So one, Jen, would be like very clearly if you're closely supervising the work of your independent contractors, and not just you, but remember like someone in your business, so a manager or
Mhm.
leader, because that is considered you as the employer. If you have independent contractors that report directly to someone in the business, like in a very manager employee kind of way, where they're making sure they're where they're supposed to be when they're supposed to be there, like they're giving them individual tasks to do, that is a really huge red flag. So direct supervision of work is not a good idea when it comes to independent contractors. Of course, you have to make sure they're delivering, but that should be at a very high level. Um, Requiring exclusive services. So if you prohibit your independent contractors to work for your competitors and or similar businesses, major red flag. Do not do that. And I would say, like, if we're talking about stuff that could immediately disqualify you and make you lose this argument, this is probably one of those things. So,
Yeah. Or even have
um,
a what's the word I'm looking for? The competition
non-compete. Yeah.
non-compete. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. It basically is the same thing. So you really shouldn't be requiring them not to do that. if you're having them come to like meetings where your employees come, each Monday, they're coming to the staff meeting, they're going to all their employer events, red flag.
Mhm.
They're acting,
Agreed.
they're quacking like a duck, an employee duck. So they,
Something about taste what the employees are tasting.
yeah, they taste like a duck.
They taste, now we're tasting duck.
I really enjoy duck. So, you know, and I'll think about that. It's almost lunchtime.
Oh man.
So that's, and also, if they also have employees that work in your business that report to them as a contractor, also a red flag, right? Like that's weird for a layer of management to be like occupied by a independent contractor. They
Right.
probably work, should be an employee then. So there are other ones that we'll list maybe on the article, but those are some really big ones. And so just if any of those set off red flags in your mind, first of all, take a shot because that's a red indicator in the unfiltered HR drinking game, and then also talk to somebody because you probably have someone that's misclassified.
Yes, please.
All right. So let's talk about unfiltered advice now, Jen. So based on all these changes and things, the number one thing you guys need to do, which we've kind of already talked about, is really review all of your relationships with independent contractors based on this new old standard. Just knowing though that even with kind of like going back to these rules, they've been revised slightly again to even be more ambiguous and more in favor of the employment status. So go back through all of your relationships and make sure that you are in good standing. This may result in you needing to convert these people to employees, which you need to do that. And if you have questions about how to do that, maybe you have no employees right now and you've been only using independent contractors, and now you realize like, crap, I should have employees, and you're doing the payroll setup process, and you have to register for unemployment insurance and pay that tax now and all that stuff. Make sure you know what's required if you do have to convert people to employees. And I know Complete Payroll does a really great job of like hands-on walking new employers through that. So you can certainly reach out to them for
Figuratively,
help.
of course.
Yeah.
Figuratively.
Yes. Yeah. So you can reach out to them for help, or myself for help, or there's resources online, but make sure that if you do need to convert people that you know what that means and you set up the
Mhm.
infrastructure to have employees. Also use this as an opportunity to research other standards that you might have to comply with. So in New York, we have a test that really somewhat mirrors the federal DOL test. So no need to look further there, except compared to the IRS test that we have here. But again, not really much severely worse than the DOL test in terms of standards. But if you're in the states of California, Illinois, Maryland, New Jersey, Ohio, or Oregon, or you have workers in those states, right? So even if you are not headquartered there, if you have independent contractors in those states, you
Mhm.
need to understand the test in that state is actually even much more strict than it is at the federal DOL level. It's called the ABC test. So look it up, Google it. I'll have a link on the site too to show which states have which tests. But if you do have contractors in those states, you're probably going to be subject to even worse terms. So you want to look at those tests as well and use this as an opportunity to look at that too.
Yeah,
Um,
again, that's California, Illinois, Maryland, New Jersey, Ohio, and Oregon. Just in case you were listening to that and then are panicking. Wait, what? There's more.
Yes, yeah, and we'll put it all up there. And there's other ones that have those are full ABC test states. There's some states that have just the A and B, just as B and C, and we'll put a map
Mhm.
up. It's
Yep.
confusing. um, but really, what all of you should do if you have independent contractors of any
You froze
type.
there for just 1 second.
Okay, it was okay on my end, but we'll keep going. So you should
Okay.
create a statement of work for your independent contractors. So actually,
Mhm.
in New York State, there is a requirement, and it's related to the Freelance Isn't Free Act that's protecting kind of like the wages and the wage payment terms of freelancers. Based on that, you really should have what New York State requires is a certain statement of work for anyone that you have like a freelance or independent contractor relationship with, and that does minimally require you to define the payment terms of your independent contractor relationship. But kind of launching off of that, this is another really great opportunity to clearly outline that this person is an independent contractor, what you control, what they control, and put in words on paper things that clearly support and demonstrate that your intention is for them to be completely separate and to not have, control, and for them to pay their own expenses and all of that kind of stuff. Now, just like other things we talk about, what you have in writing does not matter if in reality it's very different, right? If you are controlling their work. So make sure that you're following those terms, but at least starting with that statement of work is a really good starting point. So you can probably find lots of independent contractor agreement templates on LegalZoom and things like that. We help clients with this as well, but that's a really smart thing to put into place if you have these relationships and want to continue to have them moving forward.
Absolutely.
All right, Jen. So finally, let's get to like the
grossness.
The scary part. I mean, this is all scary, but we don't want to scare anybody, but it is really, I think a lot of people, when it comes to employment law in general and HR, and I don't have like a personal self-worth complex because of this either at all. So they don't take it seriously, and it's not like really well respected, and they don't believe, no one really believes like they're going to get in trouble until they do. And they think it's all just like folklore, and that only happens to big businesses. It's not going to happen to me. Maybe you think you're smarter than these agencies and things, but I mean, especially in today's world where there's so many opportunities for employees to like file claims and even make false reports that could introduce auditors' eyes into your business, it's just extremely foolish to be doing any of this stuff wrong when you know it's wrong. It's just not worth it at the end of the day. So the penalties and fines for this include things like if you had contractors that should have been employees and therefore you weren't paying your Social Security tax, employer part of the tax for them, the FICA, you weren't paying PFL premiums, disability premiums, workers' comp premiums, you weren't paying unemployment insurance tax on these people. For whatever period they were working for you as an independent contractor that they should have been an employee, you will owe all of that back. And then potentially fines and penalties on top of it. And in wage and hour land, remember, these things can go back up to 6 years. So that's a really long time, and that could really add up. In addition to that, if they were supposed to be an employee and you were supposed to be paying them overtime and things like that, and they worked a lot of hours for you, you're also going to owe them maybe past due overtime or past due time for meal periods you didn't pay for. All the every single employment law potentially could come down on you, and you didn't comply, and now you retroactively may need to make up for that on top of the taxes from the IRS and all of that stuff. And these agencies, go ahead.
It's not just a fine for misclassifying. It's going to compound everything you weren't doing for an employee as if you had an employee and weren't following those rules as an employee.
Yeah. And how can they find you, Jen? This is a really, really good point also. A lot of times I'm sure people listening, when I say this, might be worried if, unemployment audits, right? That's usually the first little peek into your business. They want to know, they're basically auditing when they do an unemployment audit, who are the employees you had on your books? What did you pay out compared to the head count that we can kind of determine? And if there's any discrepancies there, they're going to wonder what's that from? And should those people have been employees? So the unemployment audit is usually an initial fishing expedition by New York State to, really look into this and see if there's any opportunity there for a misclassification issue. And just so you know, the state governments, the federal DOL, the IRSs, and even the federal, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, they've all explicitly stated publicly that they are collaborating on these efforts. So if one agency comes in and does an audit for something and sees something or finds something that they think may be of interest to another agency, they're going to share that information. So it's the stakes are higher than ever. These things have never been maybe done before, at least not explicitly stated out in the open, which means they're going to be taking advantage of these opportunities. And one misclassification can easily turn into a huge class action, right? If you've had several workers that have been misclassified over years, so then the price tag just grows even more. So major stuff, like major stuff to take seriously.
Yeah, it's heavy.
Um,
It's heavy stuff. And again, we're not trying to scare you, but we are trying to scare you at the same time. I mean, we're trying to protect your business. And that's the point of this whole episode and the point of the whole podcast is we're trying to help you
yeah,
protect your business
yeah,
and, make sure that you're aware of these tests and how hard they're both the Department of Labor, New York State, IRS have come down on it and are planning on coming down on it, especially coming in March. So get your ducks
yeah.
in a row now. Speaking of ducks, you see how I
There
just
we
like
go.
loop that back all the way? Quack, quack, quack. It sounds like a duck. Get your duck in a row.
Now the ducks are going to be on the drinking game list, the mention of ducks. So we'll have to
I
move
like
it.
it. Na 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 na. Or that's a chicken. That's
That's
pretty
a
good.
chicken.
I
All
think
right,
that's a
just
chicken, Dad. Whatever. It's the same
well,
family.
edible poultry. Okay, that'll be the turkeys, ducks, pheasants.
Uh,
um, but Jen, so not only though should you be worried about audits, a final point on that. The actions of your individual employees or contractors could also inadvertently turn you in. And this is a point that I want to make sure everybody hears.
Mhm.
Even if you have a contractor that worked for you that you love, you guys had an amazing relationship, there's no bad blood, but they're a naive person. They don't understand that they were a contractor and therefore aren't eligible for something like disability if they get hurt outside of work, workers' comp if they get hurt working for you, or they decide to resign to stop working for you and for some reason decide that they want to try to apply for unemployment before they go do something else. And again, a contractor would not normally be eligible for unemployment, but they may not understand that. If they go file an unemployment claim, if they go file a disability claim in New York State, maybe a workers' comp claim, these are all going to be red flags to those agencies when they say, I don't see this person as an employee at this business. And that's going to open up potentially a whole bag of, worms for you in Pandora's box, or chicken coop, I guess we could say, was sticking with the poultry thing,
For the duck
to,
pond.
to really come in and investigate and find out, again, is there a misclassification issue? Same with if someone works for you as a contractor and that contractor term ends kind of in bad blood, right? And they want to file a discrimination or wrongful termination lawsuit against you. Yeah, they're not technically allowed to do that, and they don't have that protection really in most cases as a contractor. But that doesn't mean that they can't go file that. And then when New York State sends you the claim and you say, oh, they weren't an employee, they were a contractor, then New York State's going to be like, huh,
Prove it.
maybe
Prove
they
it.
should have been an employee. And then again, just opens up a can of worms. So there are so many opportunities for this to be even inadvertently and innocently kind of like flagged for you. So again, just raises the reason the concern you should have in really getting this right in your business. And Jen, just to throw some numbers out there as a final kind of underline of all of this stuff. Some cases recently that settled that were like more class actiony, but that snowballed was $13 million for 300 janitors that were found to be misclassified, $300,000 for just 13 home improvement type workers that were found to be misclassified. So if you have a handyman business or something and they're all independent contractors, probably not a good idea. There's 300K right there, 13 people. $55 million for a case that covered baked goods, so like delivery workers that were delivering baked goods. So even though the business only baked the goods, they determined that the delivery drivers the bakery had enough control over them that they should have been employees, and that was $55 million price tag for that business. There's the golf caddies class action in New York State right now as well for those country clubs. So you can see this spans many industries, many different employer types and different sized groups. So don't think that because you're small or you're in hospitality or whatever, that this may not catch up with you either. So please take this seriously, re-listen to this and go through the checklist, reach out for help if you need it. And then I guess we'll end on a positive note, Jen. This does not mean that you guys can't have freelancers. We don't want to kill the freelance world. It does not mean that you can't have independent contractors. Just make sure that you're not doing anything that very explicitly violates the kind of standards that come with that or the requirements that come with that status. And just have employees when you're supposed to have employees. But one alternative to all of this, if you kind of want to go outside of the system, is a site like Upwork or like these freelance sites. And I do want to make a point that if you have freelancers or contractors that work for you outside of the US, which is very common now, I actually use Upwork, and Edgar, who produces all this content now, is from Upwork. So
Edgar.
he's awesome. Woo, shout out to Edgar. He is awesome, and he's in the Philippines, but there's a lot of people in Canada, or maybe they're just nomads or in their rounds. But if they're not a US citizen, they're not subject to these like laws either. So if you have those relationships, you don't need to be so worried about those, right? They're not gonna be able to like be determined to be misclassified and owe taxes and all that stuff because they're not citizens here. So that's a kind of a route that you can go outside of some of the jurisdiction of this stuff if you really want to, keep your freelance or independent contractor, population, I guess, in your business. So just some last minute advice. That's a little bit of like a, maybe a positive spin and hopeful little nugget there, but
yeah,
that's
and like
it.
I said, we're not trying to get rid of freelancers or independent contractors. It's great. Just make sure that you both are following the requirements, and that's all we're saying.
Yeah.
And don't try to control too much of what go through that test, and don't try to control too much of their work or their day, because then they're an employee. So
yeah. Well, we're not trying to do anything, Jen. We're just trying to inform you guys. So
we're trying to inform you
of what the government's trying to do.
Trying to protect your business. Make sure you know all the no's.
Yes, but so that's it. So thanks for bearing with us. We know it was a really long episode, but well worth hopefully every minute. It's a very robust topic. So reach out if you guys have any questions. Otherwise, we'll see you next time and wrap it up. Yeah.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks, Jen.